Picture yourself asleep, fully out, mouth open, maybe drooling a little, completely unaware of anything happening around you. In that state you are, by any reasonable definition, defenseless. Now move that image out of your bedroom and into a tent somewhere remote, a strip of nylon, so thin you could put your finger through it, and on the other side of that fabric is a forest full of animals that could kill you without much effort at all. Wolves, bears, big cats, creatures that can pick up your heartbeat from a distance, catch your scent long before you'd ever notice them, and see in near total darkness while you lie there with your eyes shut and your guard completely down. And still, morning after morning, you open your eyes and nothing has happened. Why does that keep being true? Stop and actually sit with that question for a second, because it deserves more than a shrug. An unconscious human is essentially just a body, slow, quiet, unable to defend itself, unable to run, barely able to register a threat until a threat is already on top of it. Logic says campsites should be a nightly buffet for anything hungry enough to wander close. But that's not what happens. It almost never happens. And the explanation isn't a single tidy fact. It's a stack of them, each one stranger and more interesting than the last, and together they describe something like an unspoken truce between our species and the wild. A truce older than cities, older than farming, older than almost anything we normally call human history. And the strange part is that most of us live our whole lives inside that truce without ever noticing it's there, the same way you don't notice air pressure until it changes. We sleep outdoors, we hike through territory that technically belongs to animals capable of ending us in seconds, and we treat the whole thing as a mild inconvenience rather than what it actually is. Proof that something enormous is working quietly in our favor every single night. Let's get into it. Start with a part that sounds like arrogance, but is really just cold biology. You are, on some level, terrifying. Not you personally. Scrolling through this right now, you're probably harmless, unremarkable, no threat to anyone. But humanity as a whole, from the perspective of a predator's nervous system, is genuinely one of the most frightening things in the natural world. It doesn't look that way from the outside. We have no claws worth mentioning. We're slow. We're not particularly strong for our size, and our night vision is laughable compared to almost anything that actually hunts after dark. On paper, we should be an easy mark. And yet a 2019 study out of UC Santa Cruz put this to the test directly. Researchers set up speakers near mountain lions in the Santa Cruz Mountains and played back ordinary human voices. Nothing aggressive, no yelling, just people talking normally. The mountain lions bolted. They fled at rates matching, and in several cases exceeding, how they reacted to recordings of barking dogs. These are animals capable of dragging a full-grown deer up a hillside, animals built from nose to tail for efficient killing, and a few seconds of casual conversation sent them running. That wasn't a fluke result either. The same researchers documented mountain lions walking away from kills they'd already made, fresh food mid-meal, the instant human voices played nearby. Abandoning a kill is an expensive decision for a predator. Those calories are gone and won't come back. And they made that trade anyway, because whatever discomfort human sound triggers in them outweighed the cost of walking away from a meal. This isn't an isolated Californian quirk, either. Field researchers have logged the same avoidance pattern on other continents. Lions in South Africa's Kruger region shift their movement to dodge zones with heavy human traffic. Tigers across parts of India steer wide around villages, sitting inside otherwise perfect habitat, and jaguars deep in the Amazon reroute themselves around locations with regular human presence. None of these animals are physically unable to attack us. They've simply, as a species, arrived at the conclusion, reinforced over an enormous number of generations, that we're not worth the risk. That conclusion has a brutal history behind it, and understanding it changes how you see the whole picture. Humans have functioned as active predators for roughly 2 million years, and we have been extraordinarily good at it. We hunted mammoths into extinction. We wiped out giant ground sloths, cave bears, saber-toothed cats, and woolly rhinos. Species that weathered ice ages and then vanished within a relatively narrow window after humans showed up. On the North American continent alone, we pushed wolves to the brink across nearly the entire landmass and erased mountain lions from the whole eastern half. We trapped, poisoned, and shot large predators so relentlessly and for so long that the ones alive today are, quite literally, descended from the individuals who were the most cautious around us. That's not poetic language. That's straightforward natural selection at work. The animals bold enough to approach human settlements got killed before they could pass on that boldness. The ones who kept their distance survived, bred, and handed that wariness down the line. Multiply that pattern across thousands of generations, and the caution stops being learned behavior. It becomes hardwired instinct, the default operating setting of every large predator sharing territory with humans today. So when a leopard catches your scent drifting through the dark, something ancient fires in its brain. It's not a conscious thought, not a memory of history. It's an inherited alarm bell, passed down from every ancestor of that leopard who survived a run-in with our species, saying, "Be careful, don't engage, keep moving." Now consider your smell something you've probably never given a second thought to because you've been surrounded by other humans your whole life and stopped noticing it long ago. But to a predator working with a nose that outperforms yours by a factor of 10 to potentially over 100,000, depending on the species, you're broadcasting a loud, complicated, and thoroughly unnatural chemical signature. A bear's sense of smell is estimated to run roughly 7 times stronger than a bloodhound's. Wolves can register scent from close to 2 miles off under good conditions. Big cats carry a specialized structure called the Jacobson's organ that lets them essentially taste scent particles pulled from the air, extracting chemical detail we can't even conceptualize. To an animal like that, a sleeping human is a wall of confusing olfactory noise. You smell like synthetic tent fabric and whatever chemical residue clings to your gear. You smell like the meal you ate hours earlier, the snacks zipped in your bag, the soap and shampoo and sunscreen and bug spray layered over your skin, a cocktail of manufactured compounds with no equivalent anywhere in nature. Strip all that away, and underneath it you smell like a primate, which registers as something, but not the thing. Not the deer, not the wildebeest, not the rabbit. Not any of the prey animals these predators have spent millions of years being calibrated to recognize and pursue. A predator's hunting drive isn't some generic urge to attack anything that twitches. It's a precision system tuned to particular targets. A wolf reacts to the specific movement rhythm of hoofed animals. A lion's strike response gets triggered by the shape, speed, and scent profile of prey it has chased countless times before. You don't match any of that. You're outside the pattern entirely, and things outside the pattern tend to produce hesitation rather than aggression in most predators. Then there's fire, arguably the single smartest survival hack our species has ever stumbled into. Fire triggers an almost universal fear response across land animals, and it's not something they learn through trial and error. It's baked in from birth. Creatures that fled fire during wildfires lived to reproduce. Creatures that didn't. That fear runs so deep that lab-raised animals with zero prior exposure, the flame will still show avoidance behavior at the mere smell of smoke. Humans have controlled fire for somewhere between 1 and 2 million years, and for most of that stretch, sleeping beside a flame has simply been standard practice. We probably weren't doing it purely for warmth or cooking. We were, whether we understood it or not, deploying a repellent. A campfire isn't just heat. It's a signal sent out into the surrounding darkness announcing that something dangerous, something that commands fire, is present and should be avoided. Predators absorbed that message a very long time ago, and by now the signal doesn't even need conscious interpretation. It just triggers automatic avoidance. We figured out fire before farming, before pottery, before writing, before architecture. Turns out that was exactly the right priority. It's worth pointing out that this fire avoidance instinct doesn't just apply to the classic predators everyone pictures when they think of danger in the wild. Elephants, despite being herbivores and not remotely interested in eating you, are famously wary of flame and smoke, and conservationists have actually used that wariness deliberately, lighting controlled fires or chili-laced smoke to steer elephant herds away from farmland without ever having to confront the animals directly. Hyenas, often stereotyped in fiction as bold and reckless, show the same pattern of pulling back from active fire pits at night, circling at a distance rather than approaching. Even some species that have learned to tolerate a surprising amount of human proximity during the day, scavenging near roads or rural settlements, still won't push in close to an actual flame after dark. Fire seems to function almost like a universal off switch across an enormous range of species, cutting across predator and prey alike. which says something about just how deeply that fear is wired into the animal kingdom as a whole. Now, let's take apart a myth that decades of movies have drilled into everyone's head. Predators are not reckless. Far from it. The image of the fearless apex predator that attacks anything that crosses its path is pure fiction. Real large predators are cautious almost to a fault because they have no other option. A lion carries no health insurance. A wolf gets no sick days. A single serious injury, a fractured leg, a deep puncture wound, a damaged eye, can mean a slow, grinding death from starvation weeks or months later. There's no vet in the wild. Wounds either heal on their own while the animal somehow keeps hunting and eating, or they don't heal and the animal dies. So every engagement decision a predator makes runs through a survival calculation. Is this worth the risk? Do I understand how this thing will behave? Is the payoff big enough to justify what I might lose? A sleeping human fails that calculation on several fronts simultaneously. First, there's unfamiliarity. A predator hunts most confidently when it knows its prey intimately. How it runs, where blind spots are, how it reacts under panic. None of that applies to us. We're erratic. We might wake up screaming. We might have tools within reach. We might have other humans nearby ready to respond violently. That level of unpredictability reads as a serious hazard to something trying to minimize risk. It's the same reason experienced predators are often more cautious around novel prey items in general. An antelope with an unusual gait, a bird species it hasn't encountered before. Anything that breaks the expected pattern tends to get a wide berth rather than an immediate attack, because the animal simply doesn't have the behavioral map it needs to predict what happens next. We fall into that same bucket of unreadable, except amplified, because almost nothing about us conforms to any prey template predator has ever built. Second, their size. Standing upright. Humans read as surprisingly large and imposing, and our default bipedal stance functions almost like a built-in threat display. The same posture gorillas and bears adopt specifically to look dangerous. Even collapsed and motionless, our silhouette doesn't scream easy meal the way a low, four-legged prey animal's does. Third, and probably most decisive, why take the gamble at all? A predator living in a healthy, intact territory almost always has easier, more familiar options nearby. Chasing down something strange and unpredictable when there's a perfectly good antelope or hare available a few hundred meters away just doesn't make sense economically. The math never favors us. Here's a piece of this that rarely comes up. Your sleep is less vulnerable than it feels from the inside. Human sleep moves through cycles, deep slow wave stages followed by lighter stages, including REM, during which your brain stays surprisingly active. Researchers have found that even during these lighter phases, your brain keeps monitoring the environment, staying alert to unfamiliar sounds in particular, flagging them faster than familiar ones. This is sometimes called a sentinel function of sleep. The idea that even while resting, animals, humans included, maintain a partial watch over their surroundings. During lighter sleep, your brain is quietly filtering incoming sensory data, an oddly loud snap branch, the rustle of something large moving through undergrowth, a subtle shift in air pressure, or scent that comes with big animal drawing near. Any of these can pull you toward wakefulness faster than you'd expect. This isn't an accident biology. It's a product of it. Early humans who slept too heavily, who stayed unresponsive to nighttime danger, were disproportionately the ones who didn't survive to pass on their genes. Lighter sleepers, the ones capable of going from unconscious to fully alert in a matter of seconds, were the ones who lived and reproduced. Across hundreds of thousands of years, that pressure tuned human sleep to stay lighter and more fragmented than that of most large mammals, on the assumption that something in the dark might always be worth waking up for. So even though sleep feels like total surrender, you're actually running a fairly capable, if imperfect, early warning system the entire time. Add to that the fact that humans are almost never truly alone out there. We camp in groups, sleep in groups, and respond as groups. Predators throughout the animal kingdom understand group dynamics on a deep level, because their usual prey also lives in groups. A wildebeest in the middle of a herd is dramatically safer than one caught alone at the edge. A fish tucked into the center of a school is far harder to pick off than one that's drifted apart. Predators aren't just looking for prey. They're specifically hunting for separation, scanning for the individual that's isolated, lagging behind, cut off from support. A group of sleeping humans doesn't read as a scattered collection of easy targets. It reads as a unit that will likely wake and respond collectively the moment one member is disturbed. That risk of triggering a chaotic group reaction, rather than a clean solo kill, is exactly the kind of scenario predators are wired to steer clear of. This is actually consistent with something researchers have observed in early human sites for a long time. The physical layout of old encampments, fires positioned centrally, sleeping areas arranged around the perimeter, suggests our ancestors intuitively understood the value of a defensible cluster long before anyone could have explained the underlying predator psychology. A scattered, disorganized camp with people sleeping in random, isolated spots would present a very different picture to a passing predator than a tight, firelit group all bedded down within shouting distance of one another. The arrangement itself was doing defensive work, whether or not anyone thought of it that way at the time. None of this means humans are untouchable, and it would be dishonest to leave that part out. The attacks that do occur follow a remarkably consistent pattern, and it almost always traces back to something disrupting the normal rules. An injured predator that can no longer chase its usual prey. A starving predator whose habitat has been degraded and whose typical food sources have collapsed. A predator that's had so much repeated contact with humans that its inherited caution has eroded. Something that can happen alarmingly quickly once animals learn to associate people with easy food rather than danger. Or simply an old predator, past its physical prime, no longer able to run down the game it once could. The lions of Tsavo in Kenya are the textbook example. In 1898, 2 male lions killed somewhere between roughly 3 dozen and well over 100 railway workers over about 9 months, with historical accounts disagreeing on the exact toll and the story growing larger with each retelling. What often gets left out is that these were atypical lions. Both were maneless, unusual for the region, and one had significant dental damage that likely made hunting normal prey far harder than it should have been. They weren't representative of lion behavior in general. They were an exception produced by exceptional, broken circumstances. The Champavat tiger, blamed for an estimated several hundred deaths across India and Nepal in the early 1900s, was later found by the hunter who eventually tracked it down to have suffered a gunshot injury earlier in its life that shattered 2 of its canine teeth, crippling its ability to take down natural prey. Pushed by that injury and by shrinking habitat, it turned to the one food source it could still physically manage. What's striking about both cases, and about most of the smaller, less famous incidents scattered throughout the historical record, is how often a physical impairment or a collapsing food supply sits quietly underneath the story once you dig past the sensational headlines. These weren't predators making a calm, rational decision that humans were suddenly fair game. They were animals in genuine crisis, operating outside every normal constraint that would otherwise have kept them well away from us. And the tragedy of those events is really a story about desperation rather than a story about predators finally figuring out that people are prey. That same pattern shows up again and again across documented predator attacks near human camps. Something broke first. The usual calculation got scrambled. Inherited caution got overridden by desperation, which means a general rule holds remarkably well whenever the surrounding ecosystem is intact, the predator is physically healthy, and humans haven't done something to muddy the signals, leaving food out where it shouldn't be, approaching wildlife too closely, or skipping the fire because it seemed like unnecessary effort. There's one last thread worth pulling, and it might be the strangest part of the entire story. We've been so thorough at teaching the natural world to fear us that this fear now ripples outward in ways we never fully anticipated. That same 2019 UC Santa Cruz research didn't stop at proving mountain lions avoid humans. It traced how that avoidance cascades through the wider food web. When mountain lions steer clear of human-heavy zones, deer in those same areas experience less predation pressure, so their numbers climb. Larger deer populations put more strain on vegetation. Meanwhile, mid-sized predators like coyotes, bobcats, and foxes also pull back from areas with human activity, which loosens their grip on rodent populations, letting those numbers expand too. The whole system shifts layer by layer because of us, because the fear we've generated across countless generations spreads outward like a signal, reshaping the behavior of predators up and down the food chain, often without us ever directly encountering most of the animals involved. One species, one inherited fear, and it ripples across an entire living system. Ecologists have started calling this kind of indirect influence a landscape of fear, a term that sounds almost poetic for something so measurable. Researchers can actually map it, plotting where animals travel freely versus where they clearly avoid, and the resulting maps line up strikingly well with human presence, even in places where no human has ever laid a hand on a single one of those animals. We tend to think of our environmental impact purely in terms of what we physically remove or destroy, but this shows something stranger. We're altering entire ecosystems just by existing in them, just by being the one species virtually everything else has learned, over an almost unimaginable stretch of time, to steer clear of. The most dangerous animal on this planet is the one that mastered fire before it mastered almost anything else. The one that has been quietly reshaping ecosystems not only through what it kills and eats, but through what it makes every other creature too afraid to touch. The one that sleeps lightly, moves in groups, and carries thousands of generations of hard-earned survival written into its instincts. That's you. That's what you actually are. So the next time you're stretched out in a tent somewhere far from anywhere, listening to the noise of the dark press against that thin nylon wall, and you feel that small flicker of old, inherited unease, let it be there. That feeling is exactly what kept your ancestors alive long enough for you to exist. But the thing moving around out there beyond the fabric isn't coming in. On some level, it already knows better than to try.